We started looking at sentences, which is syntax, and we will continue looking at some of the components of a sentence. We have addressed some of the questions like what is a sentence made of? What's the important part in a sentence, and how do we make one, right? We have tried to answer those questions in some sense, but here are some more questions that are going to be interesting for us to understand, such as what's a subject in a sentence? We have talked about this thing briefly. What's a subject? If someone asks you now, what's a subject? What will be the answer?
Sentence minus predicate.
Loudly.
Sentence minus predicate.
Sentence minus predicate. But that's nice mathematical theorem, but doesn't help much understanding a subject. The idea of a subject. That's all right. That's okay. Which in a way tells us this proposition that subject is different from predicate. Subject is not part of the predicate. Therefore, it has a different status compared to every other element which are part of predicate. Is one thing about a subject. In other words, predicate contains objects and verbs, okay, and other elements. So, if we are talking about three elements like subject, verb, and object, we know with this description that subject is different from verb and predicate. It has a different status, right? So, how do we define it? How do we define it in a more precise way?
The word which is in agreement with the verb is called.
That sounds better. A noun or a word, more precisely we can say a noun. We are going to call it something else, which is a noun phrase little later once we talk about phrases. So, we can say a word or a noun that agrees with the verb, and we have already seen what agreement means.
So, but in this sentence, Seema ne saved Kaya. In this, we will take Seema as the. No, that is the semantic subject.
That's a semantic subject, right?
So, here we are talking about the grammatical.
No, we are talking about both. We are talking about both, and the way to put both together.
Here, the save is in agreement with.
Of course, save is in agreement with. So, the reason why I gave you the sentence, Seema ne सेब खाए और राजू ने चाय बनाई, one of the reasons why I wanted you to take a look at that sentence is when we talk about subjects, many a times we do not look at two parts of subjects. One is semantic content of a subject and the other is grammatical component of a subject. By now, you have seen independence of syntax, right? By now, you have seen a sentence which is all that you need to make a sentence is its grammatical component. Even if a sentence doesn't make much sense, like colorless green ideas sleep furiously. A dog was reading a newspaper in the library in the night, right? These sentences don't mean any sense. They don't make any sense. Still, they are grammatical sentences. The fact that syntax is independent of meaning, okay, makes us think little bit harder at a point that there are two parts of subjects. One is its semantic content. So, a word which is semantically a subject is called a logical subject. Okay? So, in a sentence like Raju ne chai banai, Raju is still a logical subject. But grammatically speaking, the subject is the noun that agrees with the verb, which happens to be chai in this sentence. If you put all these things together, you can see that in many languages of the world, many a times, the other 99% of times, or maybe little less or little more, both logical subject and grammatical subject are in one word. Therefore, we don't need to separate them to see two parts. However, in some cases, you can categorically see logical subject is something else and grammatical subject is something else.
What will be the predicate?
What will be the predicate in this sentence? You tell me. The predicate will be, I mean that's a great question. What will be a predicate? What your question is logical subject part of the predicate or not? Or if chai is, if we leave logical subject out, is the grammatical subject part of the predicate? That is what your question is hinted at. And we have seen that subjects are out of predicate, right? So that's a conceptual question. In order to answer this question, we need to look at some other stuff. Okay. The reason why I am not giving you a straight answer to this question, that this is the noun which is out of the predicate, and the other one is inside the predicate. There is a reason for that. The reason is the whole notion of subject is a conceptual notion. Still, there is no going back on the point that subjects are outside the predicate. Subjects have higher status than components of predicate. That at a conceptual level still holds. Okay, and that's part of principle. Also, what is part of principle is there must be a subject in a sentence. That is, without a subject, we don't have a sentence. Okay. Therefore, we see sentences like go home. Is there a subject here? Is there a subject here? No. Then how does it follow the principle? We have, I thought we did, but let me repeat it again. Principle of language says that there cannot be a sentence without a subject. And you understand the meaning of principle? The meaning of principle is this cannot be violated. Every sentence of every language must follow that. So, I am telling you it's such a strong rule that cannot be violated. That is, every language, and in every language, every sentence must have a subject. And then I am giving you counter example also. We have a sentence in English, go home. If this is a grammatical sentence, is this a grammatical sentence? And this is the meaning of grammaticality. If it is a grammatical sentence, then it must be following principles of language. In other words, it must have a subject. So what is the subject of the sentence? You. Why are we not saying you then? Implied, right? We understand that it's automatically implied. In all the languages of the world, when it comes to imperative sentences like these, go home, we don't need the subject overtly present. In other words, we don't need the physical presence of the word which becomes the subject. Can anybody guess, or does anyone know why? This guess is not a big guess. You can still say. No. Body language. Think little harder. What I am saying is, this is the point where I can really extract some serious thinking from you. Why do we not think about Hindi? How do we say that in Hindi? Go home. Is there a subject here? No. That is, overtly there is no subject. How do we say that in Tamil? Is there a subject there? No. Malayalam? How do we say loudly? Is there a subject there? No. If you know any other language, just try it there. There is no subject. That is, when I say no subject, no overt presence of a subject. But you would agree that in all the languages, English, Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam, that we have seen right now, in all of them the employed subject is you. Is that true? The answer to this question is principle of economy. If it is you everywhere, then what's the point of saying that? When we say go home, right? We mean, if I am talking to him and I am telling him go home, I don't mean you go home, right? This is why the subject of an imperative sentence is going to be second person. And if the second person is the subject employed in every language, there is no, the languages do not feel the need to express it overtly. And they tend to suppress it. The lexical suppression, that is, not keeping subject overtly present in the language, doesn't mean deleting the place of subject. We can still retrieve the subject as you. As long as we retrieve it, dropping is not at all a problem. Now, keep that in mind. Dropping doesn't mean no presence. Conceptually, it is present. So, when we say no sentence without a subject, we are talking about conceptual presence of subject. We are not talking about in a written sentence, subject must be there. Is this point clear? Right? Now, look at it once again. Before I go to predicate and talk a little bit about that, let me tell you one more point about this, about subjects. In a language like Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam, we can drop subjects in other places too. Suppose I want to say, I am eating an ice cream. Okay? I am eating an ice cream. How do I say that in Hindi? Can I also say ice cream kha raha hu? If someone asks me this question, in the question also, one doesn't need to give the subject. What are you eating? How do we say that? What are you eating? Tum is not needed. We can say kya kha rahe ho? And the answer could be ice cream kha raha hu. Is this making sense to everybody? Now, Tamil? Do I need to say yes? Say I? And in the question, what are you eating? Do I need to say you, that is aap or tum? How about Malayalam? So, loudly. So, do I need you? In the question, no. In the answer, do I need I? No. See this thing? To talk about principles or parametric variations, I don't need to know the language. That's one. The other thing is, the fact that there is no subject in these sentences, right? Kya kha rahe ho or ice cream kha raha hu doesn't mean these sentences do not have subjects. When I say ice cream kha raha hu, right, it clearly means what? Main. Right? When I am asking kya kha rahe ho, it clearly means only one thing, which is tum. Get it? If these things are retrievable, if we can retrieve these things from the sentence, then there is no need to put it. Or we can present the same thing in the following way. As long as things are retrievable, the language is allowed to drop them. Again, it's part of principle of economy. which means the universal principle, which is subject must be in a sentence, and principle of economy, that as long as they are retrievable, there is no need to keep them overtly present. There is no tension between these two rules. Get this point? And in the places where we see absence of subject does not really again contradict the principle of language, that is, no, there are sentences which do not have subjects. So, languages must follow universal principle, and to whatever extent possible they must obey principle of economy. At the same time, each one of them definitely respects language internal rules. Right? Now, take the same example in English. If I want to ask you, what are you eating? Can I say, are you eating? What are eating? Can I say that? No. This results into ungrammaticality because of the absence of you. Again, just because you is not retrievable from the context, the overt presence of you is required in English, which enforces us, which is language internal rule, that a subject must be present in English overtly. Okay? English follows this rule verbatim. Our languages allows dropping categorically, that is, dropping of subjects categorically, clearly, vividly. See this thing? All we need to understand from this is there is no tension between language internal rules, universal principle, and following principle of economy. Clear? Okay. So I started this thing with your question. Which part of that is predicate? I want to keep. I have talked about many things, and I think I have clarified some parts of it, but I want to keep rest of it for further level. When we talk about the actual conceptual structure of sentence, right? Then you will see the subject is projected way high in the conceptual structure. Okay? Please remind me at that time. I'll remember to show it to you. Very soon, in a couple of days, I am going to come to conceptual structure. In the conceptual structure, subject is way high, which is just to capture the idea that subject is outside the predicate. Right? Given the introductory nature of your class, probably we will not go into too much of details. But keeping this question in mind, I will definitely show you that in that conceptual framework, there are different proposals, where one proposal is no, subjects are still part of predicate. What happens actually, it's just one of the proposals. What happens actually is once the sentences are projected outside, subjects move to the front, to the higher level. Actually, they are part of predicate. The people who propose such a position, they have these things in mind. That how can we outrightly postulate a subject which is way too high and outside the predicate? These are the problems. Understand my question? So they become the basis of postulating subjects and everything within predicate. Now, if we just keep talking about these things in abstraction, that subjects are also part of predicate, in some cases subjects may not be part of predicate, in some theoretical framework subjects are outside, in some theoretical framework subjects are inside, they won't make sense. They will make sense when we have discussed that. Therefore, I am leaving this thing. But keep in mind, conceptually, there is a difference between the position of subject and position of everything else in predicate. Clear? All right. Any other question?
Sir, does all the languages in the world have the concept of predicate?
Does all the languages of the world have a concept of predicate? Yes. We, just like we cannot have a sentence without a subject, we cannot have a sentence without a predicate, which simply means what are the essential parts of predicate? There are certain parts of predicate that are essential, okay, out of which one, which is extremely essential, is a verb, okay, verb. Therefore, you do not have a sentence without a verb also, okay. So, since every language of the world has a sentence, so what follows from there is there must be predicate in every language of the world. Clear? Okay.
Does the fact that English is verb final and most
English is verb medial.
and most Indian languages are verb final, does that have anything to do with the dropping of the subject? You said it allows, the grammar allows for dropping of the subject.
No, that doesn't have. See, why some languages are verb medial and why some languages are verb final are parametric. What your question is, dropping of is the whole phenomena of dropping of subject dependent on verb being final? No. What it is dependent on is rich morphology, that is rich projections, rich agreement features. Now, what I mean by rich features is when you say tum kahan ja rahe ho, right? Look at the last verb part. Just the verb part. Okay? How do we put the whole thing in English? Going. Which happens to be just one word. Right? So at this level I can tell you, by looking at it you can see this is richer than this. Still it's not very clear. What we actually mean is the ing marker, okay, which is actually progressive or continuous aspect marker. See this thing? Is actually a separate word in a language like Hindi. See this thing? This is go, this is ing. Now, what is this? This is in a way tense marker, right? This tells us about present tense. Okay? Besides this telling you about tense marking, this talks about something else also, which is the presence of this is correlated with the presence of this pronoun. Equivalent to you in a language like Hindi, and I'm sure this distinction exists in other languages too, we have several things. Heard this thing? Am I right? And then there is something else which is not that much in use but still exists. Okay? Now, this pronoun, which is still equivalent to you, is not here if you have this as the marker. Right? Suppose I want to say aap here. Is the sentence good? Yes? No. In some form of the Hindi, some people can say yes, it is good. Okay? Some people could speak this way. Yes, it is good, but not really warranted. Why it is good? Please ask me this question. Why for some people it is good? I'll talk to you about this little later. We haven't reached that point. What's the marker for up? The final marker. If I want to keep up here, what should I have here? Hai. See this thing? The fact that this should be hai at least tells you that this is the marker for something else. If I want to say this one, tu, what's the marker here? Tu ja raha hai. Can I say tu ja rahe hain? No. Can I say tu ja rahe ho? No. See this thing? What I am trying to tell you is, besides marking tense, this also helps you retrieve the pronoun. Okay? This is the meaning of rich projections, rich morphology. Therefore, it's possible to drop these things. Because I can retrieve this thing on the basis of this. Right? The marker helps me retrieve the subject. Therefore, we can drop. Not the final or medial position of verb. Clear? Okay. Since we mentioned, can you give me a moment? I'll quickly finish the question that came up, that in some variety of Hindi, aap ja rahe ho could be acceptable. The reason for that is very simple. See, this is in the hierarchy. This is high, this is mid, and this is low. Okay? In the hierarchy of formality. So there is a reason why we have three variants, right? So what we can do is, and for all of them, there are different markers. Am I right? There are different markers. So what happens actually, and again, when I show you the conceptual tree, that is conceptual representation of a sentence, some of these things will become clearer. What happens is, a pronoun that is higher in the hierarchy can agree with something that is lower, right? But something that is lower in the hierarchy cannot agree with what is higher. Therefore, you never say tum ja rahe hain, but aap ja rahe ho is possibly allowed in some variety of Hindi. Is making sense so far? We are still talking about subjects and its agreement features. And I think the answer to your question should be clear now, that the verb final status of the verb has very little to do with this. Do with why Hindi and some other languages of South Asian subcontinent allow dropping of subjects. Rich morphology, rich projection is responsible for that. Okay? All right. Now, so to answer the question, how do we define a subject? We cannot have just one sentence definition. We will have to talk about a lot of things. At least this should be clear to you clear to you so far. What's the predicate in a sentence? A predicate in a sentence, as you have seen, minus subject, everything else is everything else is predicate, which means verbs are part of predicate. And what's also clear from examples like these is all the markers that you see, whether it's a question of tense marker or special markers for specific pronouns, aspect marker, all of them, and why and how verbs control agreement, all such information is inbuilt, encoded and manifested on verb alone. Is that true? Do you see that? Therefore, verbs are called powerhouse in a sentence. If I have already used this word, this is what I meant. Because it controls everything, it's called the central aspect of a sentence. It's a very powerful thing in a sentence. It controls everything. Okay? Among many other things, that is interplay of functional categories, that is tense, aspect, number, person, gender, agreement, all those things are either manifested, stored or projected in and around verb. Okay? These are parts of universal principle. In every language you are going to see that. Whether some features are projected or not may be part of individual languages. That is, Hindi projects more than English does. This may be language internal phenomena, but whatever it does at the verb is a specific principle of language. Okay? Now, among many things that predicate controls is nature of its objects. I think I had asked you this question last time, or maybe not. What's the relationship between verb and its object? I didn't. Okay. So by now we know three things. Now let's drop predicate for a moment. We have talked enough about this, and whatever we are going to talk now also applies to a discussion on predicate. So let's talk about verb and objects. Have you heard this word, object? Yes? No? Yes? Object in connection with sentences. Have you heard about that? Object in connection with sentences. Yes? No? You need to tell me something. Yes. Okay. What's an object? Like, we have spent enough time on subjects, and now I think we have a fairly good sense of what subjects do, what subjects are, and why subjects are the way they are. A fairly good sense of it. What are objects in a sentence, and how do we know whether we need a subject or whether we need a predicate, whether we need an object or not? About subjects, we have a principle that subjects are required. End of the story. So we don't need to figure out anything. But that principle doesn't apply to objects. See this thing? If I say, I was sleeping, this a good sentence? I was sleeping, right? I can say it in more contexts and make it more relevant. I can say, when you called, I was sleeping. Right? Does this sentence have an object? It has a verb, it has a subject, it doesn't have an object. And like this, there could be plenty of sentences in every language which doesn't have an object. Which is to say that objects are not a required part of a sentence. Whether you are going to see an object in a sentence or not depends on verb. How do we figure that out? Okay, that's the next question we are going to address. This is what I mean by how do we describe nature of verb and what is an object? These are the two questions that will be answered in that, and also it will partially answer the question about relationship between subject, predicate and an object. We have already seen the relationship between subject and its predicate. We are going to see the relationship between verb and object. Okay? All right. So you have seen these things, right? We have lexical categories in sentences, which simply means words, and their categories could be either nouns, verbs, adjectives, prepositions. I have discussed preposition with you, right? Now we understand what a preposition is. Okay. We talked about subjects and predicates. We are going to be looking at objects. So when we talk about the nature of a verb, the reason why we need to talk about nature of verb is because it determines the number of objects it requires. Only by looking at the nature of verb you can tell whether this verb needs an object or not. Okay? So if a sentence like, what was the sentence that I gave you? I was sleeping. If this sentence does not have an object, then not having an object follows from the nature of the verb sleep. Okay? So look, so what we mean by nature of verb is, have you heard these words? Intransitive, transitive. What do they mean? Intransitive. If I ask you literal meaning of the word intransitive.
Doesn't change. Transitive means to change. Make a transition.
Transition is different from transitive. Okay, they may sound similar but different. But nonetheless, nice effort. Let's understand these terms in its grammatical meaning. Okay, let's forget about its literal meaning. Let's understand them in terms of their grammatical implications. Whenever we say a verb is transitive, we mean the verb is going to have one object. Okay? Intransitive verbs will have no objects. And then at the same time we could mention there is another type of verb which is called ditransitive, which simply means if transitive has one object, ditransitives have two objects. Intransitives, we don't have a word called zero transitive or something. Intransitive means no object. Should be straightforward. No issues. Still this doesn't help us enough, right? This describes the nature of the verb, that is transitive, intransitive or ditransitive. That is zero, intransitive 0, transitive 1, ditransitive 2. But then how do I know which verb is intransitive and which verb is transitive? I will decide the number of objects if I know a verb is intransitive or transitive or ditransitive. But then how do I know one can say, okay, let me first say the question, how do I know a verb is transitive or intransitive? One answer could be, if the verb has two objects, then it's ditransitive. If it has one object, then it's transitive, and if it has no objects, then it is intransitive. But that doesn't help us either. We are talking about, so this helps us if you have a sentence. If we don't have a sentence, then how does this help? See the problem? We know the description, but this doesn't still help much. So if I give you a sentence, I was sleeping, then you know there is no object, and this much of information could be helpful, and you can see, what's the verb here? Sleep. So the word sleep is an intransitive verb. But that we can deduct from a sentence. If I just give you a verb and ask you to tell me whether it's a transitive or intransitive, how would you know? There is no way to find out. But, I mean, that's not apparent. What we mean is, that's not apparent. We need to know just a little thing. Keep in mind, it's different from gender. What did I tell you about gender? Gender of a word is arbitrarily assigned. A chair is feminine. There is no intrinsic rule which tells us chair must be feminine. Okay? That's arbitrarily assigned. But this is not arbitrary. There is a pattern in it. The pattern is very simple. Let's look at these sentences. So, the first set of verbs that you see, they are examples of intransitive verbs. Okay? They are examples of intransitive verbs. Sleep, go, come, sit, dance. These are just couple of examples, few examples. Languages are full of such examples. If you come up with a sentence with these verbs, you do not have an object. Can you see? Can you read these sentences? John was sleeping. No object. Go. Bill was going home. You see a noun after the verb go, right? Which is home, but it's not an object of this verb, which even complicates the problem. This is why I have highlighted these words in red. They are not objects. But the first sentence is at least simpler, that there is no object. In the second one you have something, and still we are saying that's not an object. The level of complexity is just higher. How do I know? Right? Third one, Mary was coming from school. We have a noun, school. We have something more than a noun. We have a preposition and a noun. We will talk about those phrases in a moment. Not in a moment, some other time. But the verb come is an intransitive verb. What follows the verb coming is not an object of the verb. Okay? Chris was sitting in a chair. The verb sit is an intransitive verb. In a chair, just like from a school, is not an object. Nancy was dancing. You don't see any object there. That's a clear intransitive verb. Get it? In the second set, verbs like eat, read and write, these are examples of transitive verbs. You can read them. You see their objects in blue. They are the required part of a sentence. If I just say, Bob was eating, the idea is this sentence is not complete as long as the object is not present. Okay? Chris was reading a novel. We must not say Chris was reading. We have to say Chris was reading a novel or whatever the person was reading. That part is the object of the verb. And then Lisa was writing a letter. See this thing? These are the objects of the verb. The objects of transitive verb. And the last two examples are examples of ditransitive verbs where you have two objects. Again, a sentence is not complete without both the objects. So we can say Tony gave a pen to his daughter. Pen is also an object. To his daughter is also another object. Both the objects must be present in the sentence for the sentence to be complete. Nancy was teaching Japanese English. What does this mean? What does this sentence mean? She was teaching English to Japanese people. Right? Look at this. We can say the same sentence in two different ways. We can say Nancy was teaching Japanese English. We can say Nancy was teaching English to Japanese. See this thing? But both must be there. Therefore, the verbs like teach and give are called ditransitive verbs. Now, these are just examples of what I have told you. I have still not told you how do I know whether a verb requires an object or not. You can say, because we are not native speakers of English, you need to check this thing only with the native speaker. Because we are not native speakers of English, a sentence like Bob was eating, to us it sounds alright, right? This is why we don't depend on the judgment about a sentence who is not a native speaker. Okay? We can say Chris was reading, it's fine. Lisa was writing, that's also fine. Now, I am not trying to say our English is bad. I am also not trying to say we don't understand how language works. The reason why in our English these sentences are good without their objects is because of this reason again. In languages, we not only drop subjects, but we can also drop objects. In our languages, we can drop objects in the context. Okay, so if we have a verb khana, which is a transitive verb, then we can drop objects, right? Because the objects are retrievable from the context. Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Marathi, Gujarati allows dropping of objects also. If a sentence without object in English is good to us, that is the influence of our native languages on English, where English does not allow dropping of objects. So if you are asking a speaker of English from India, these sentences are good to them. If you ask these sentences to a native speaker of English, they won't be able to tell you. They will be able to tell you that this sentence is incomplete. When you say Bob was eating, the sentence is incomplete. They will still be waiting for the object. Bob was eating, what do you mean? Okay? And the sentence sounds incomplete because of the lack of object. Alright? Now, to wind it up, and we'll discuss this thing very briefly when we meet next time with the other topics. We only need to ask a question. We only need to question the verb with what. If you can question the verb with what, and you have a legitimate question, then you will get an answer too. If the question is not legitimate, then there is no question of getting an answer. As long as you can question the verb, keep in mind, only with what. Question the verb with what, then that's a transitive verb. I can question eat with what or not. Eat, you don't even need to get a complete sentence. What did you eat? You can simply say eat what? Right? Does this sound like a good question? If it's a good question, then you will get an answer too. Eat pizza, eat ice cream. Then we know that this verb is transitive and it will need an object. Okay? Read what? Is that a good question? Write what? If you look at intransitive verbs, can we question for the verb sleep with the same question? Sleep what? And this is why I am telling you, please don't use other questions. Where, when, how, none of them. Just what? Sleep what? Go what? Sit what? Dance what? Okay? If the question is not legitimate, there is no possibility of getting an answer, and therefore the verb is an intransitive verb, which in turn means no object. Okay? The question about ditransitive verb is, you still need the same question what, but there is no way to figure out whether the verb is ditransitive. As long as you can figure out it's a transitive verb, that's good enough. Okay? Ditransitive verbs to non-natives, we have to find out specifically. Keep this in mind. I have given you a diagnostic test. This test is not part of either principle or parameter. This is a diagnostic test and is not 100% foolproof. It works only to a great extent. In, let's say, we can say 99% of the cases. Still, 1% of the case doesn't work with this diagnostic test, and this is not the right time to show you that 1%. At one point, I'll show you where this doesn't work, and you will be able to see. Again, you know those verbs where this rule doesn't work. There is nothing new that I am telling you. You already know, that is, our mind knows what's a transitive verb, what's an intransitive verb, which sentence is going to need an object, which sentence is not going to need an object. Our mind also knows, what I am going to tell you now is, a verb is transitive or intransitive. So this transitive or intransitive nature of a verb doesn't change or does not vary from language to language. If go is intransitive in English, it is going to stay intransitive in all the languages of the world. That doesn't change, that doesn't vary from language to language. And this, we, that is human mind, knows very well. We stop here. I think you will have classes. Any quick question?
How do we become the ditransitive?
See, ditransitive verbs are an extension of transitive verbs. So as long as you can figure out that teach is also a transitive, like you can question teach what, right? As long as you can figure out it's a transitive, that's good enough. Whether it's ditransitive or not, this diagnostic doesn't work there. There is no diagnostics for that. Only you have to depend on native intuition for that. Native intuition for that. Okay, but you can definitely say this is also a transitive. Okay, but the 1% cases where I said it doesn't work, some of the verbs that look like transitive are not transitive really. Okay, you can still question them with what, but they are not transitive. Therefore, I said in 1% of the cases they don't work. With that 1%, I didn't mean ditransitive verbs. Okay, more later. Thank you.